Reverend Sharpton and the fine work that he's doing. The legacy of NAN and what Reverend Sharpton is doing deserves not only recognition, but I think we all ought to be grateful that in a time such as this, we have the National Action Network that is doing the work that it is doing in this country. I don't really stand to introduce a ton of members, especially those that are not tithing. But I am grateful to introduce one that is a tither. Senator Booker epitomizes what Reverend Sharpton was saying a few moments ago, as he jokingly mentioned that he was on his way to the big house, the Rolls Royce, the private jet, and he was hijacked by Reverend Jesse Jackson. And as a result of that, engaged in what he's doing now, along, with Dr. Bill Jones. But let me say that for at least 22 years now, I have known Senator Cory Booker. I have personally witnessed his conviction to his faith. But more importantly, I have witnessed his commitment and his dedication to the community. He has cut his teeth in one of the most challenging urban cities in the United States of America. He's been in the front alley, the back alley, Main Street, and every street you can think of. Blooded but not bowed. And still strong enough to hold his head up and say that I still believe that there is a God somewhere that can give me strength to help change and transform the communities that I am so dedicated to. And he's not only said that with respect to Newark, but he has a conviction for the country at large. He could have, coming out of Yale, he could have, after being a Rhodes Scholar, he could have chosen a path of the private jet. He could have chosen a path of Wall Street and a lot of money. But he did not choose that path because his God-given calling was not in that direction. He is, beyond a doubt, happy with what he's doing, sometimes a little bit frustrated, but he's doing it because he has a calling to do it, and it's not just a job. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am humbled, grateful, and pleased to introduce a young man that I have perhaps been mentoring now for 20 years, who has beyond a doubt served his community and here today to share with you. Put your hands together. Let's welcome Senator Cory Booker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I am so grateful to be here, but more importantly, I am grateful to be here at a lunch for faith leaders. Now, I have to first and foremost give my respect to Reverend Al Sharpton, who's been in my life for some time now. And what I love about him is he understands things that we need to understand in our communities. Let me give you an example and be very specific. When I was elected to be a United States Senator, after serving and working in a majority black city, after serving and working in a city still struggling with poverty, struggling with segregation, struggling with decades of laws that shape our country, like redlining, racist laws that undermine investment, undermine our well-being, I now get elevated to be a senator in the United States, the fourth popularly elected African-American senator in the history of this country. And I go down to Washington. Now, I learned that just having black faces in white spaces is not enough. You're not on a board or on any kind of gathering just to sit there for the sake of diversity. So I get down to Washington to start calling the questions that need to be called. Now, the National Action Network has been doing a lot of work understanding that if you look at the principles of Dr. King's March on Washington, civil rights was mentioned, but economics and jobs was mentioned even more about the pillars of that movement. And so when I get down to Washington, I want to start talking about economic empowerment. And after talking to Reverend Sharpton and watching what he's doing, I know what my obligation is. My mom told me on that day I was sworn in by Joe Biden, she said very simply, you need to understand something. The title doesn't make the man has got to make the title. And so I called one question. I just said, hey, look, the biggest pension funds in all of America are the pension funds for the federal government. Hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, the activism of a group like NAN and others has helped to make sure that in states from New York, a blue state, to Texas, a red state, that large percentages of those pensions, those billions of dollars, is being run by so-called emerging managers, minority managers, women-run managers. I get down to Washington and call the question of the hundreds of billions of dollars, how much of this money, what percentage here is being run by so-called emerging managers? And I was stunned to find out what the truth was. Zero. Not a dollar. Now, when you are working as a mayor and you understand how difficult it is to get investment in inner city communities, and then when you get that investment, how difficult it is to make sure that that money works for the communities and not for gentrification, you know how important it is to have access to capital. And so what this gathering today is not a party. This is not a feel-good session. What I like about the Reverend Al is he's always pressing for the urgency of this moment. Now, I also want to give gratitude to others that are here. And I know we've got a lot of people that are important and special to me. Al Green over here, one of my dear friends, I'm so happy to see him. I'm so happy to be on a dais as somebody like the Reverend Jesse Jackson. But I want to get into my remarks by talking about my pastor who just introduced me. My roots in my family, all four of my grandparents go deep into the black church, from Louisiana to Alabama, from Detroit to Des Moines. My family roots have been in the black church. And more importantly than that, I came from an understanding that but for faith-based communities, I would not be here today. That it was the faith-based communities that protected communities, sheltered communities, nurtured communities. In fact, my father, who grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, he was poor. And if he was here right now, he would heckle me and say, don't tell those folks I was poor, Cory, tell them the truth. I was just po, P-O, I couldn't afford it until later. My father, whose mama couldn't take care of him, was brought in by a faith-based family, the funeral home operator in the small town of Hendersonville. And there's no tradition of college in my family. This community, this church looked at him, and you all know, see a child the way he is, that's all he'll ever amount to. But if you see the way he could be and should be and will be, he'll forever rise to those estimations. Raise a child in the way he shall go, he will not depart from it. And my father was told he was going to college, no history, and even when he couldn't afford it, to even enroll in North Carolina Central University, an HBCU, it was the church that took together its collection to give him enough money to go down the hill and enroll in college. What is the ROI on that investment that was made? Would I be standing here today without that investment? It was the church community that made a way out of no way for so many families. It was the church community that had the audacity to challenge the very idea of what it meant to be an American. I'll give you one more note on this. I stand here today because of a church community. When my family tried to move into New Jersey, in the northern suburbs, they were steered away from white communities. They found a home that they loved in a place with great public schools, and they wouldn't sell my parents the home. They told the home was sold. So group of activists led by an African-American woman in the 60s named Lee Porter. She had got together with some lawyers and got them to set up a sting operation. So my parents would go look at a home. They'd be told it was sold. The white couple would come after them and find out the house was still for sale. And on the house that my parents loved, they were told it was sold, but the white couple found out it was still for sale, put a bid on the house. The bid was accepted. Papers were drawn up. The closing was set. On the date of the closing, my father did not, the white couple did not show up. My father did. And a volunteer lawyer, a righteous Jewish man named Marty Friedman, walks into the real estate agent's office, and the real estate agent realized that he was caught, got upset, angry, didn't capitulate, stood up and punched my dad's lawyer in the face and sigged a dog on my dad. Now let me tell you this. Every time my dad would tell the story, the dog would get bigger. When I was growing up, this young man, as my father used to call us, the 4 raisins and a tub of vanilla ice cream. When I was growing up in this town, my dad was like, boy, don't you walk around here like you hit a triple. You were born on third base. I had to fight a pack of wolves to get you in this house. So I go back as a senator to find these folks who helped my family. It was easy to find Miss Lee Porter from the 1960s, head of the Fair Housing Council, because she is still the head of the Fair Housing Council today. She is 92 years old. These are the heroes, folks. And I find her and I thank her. I bring her to my office. I get on my knees before her and I let her know that it's because of her that I'm here, and I wanted to meet the lawyers. I needed to meet them and know why they did what they did. And she told me how to find the lawyer that organized all the lawyers. And this is why faith is so important. Because I asked him what was his motivation. Why would he help as a young lawyer, white man in his community? Why would he be working so hard to help black families integrate? And this is what he told me. He goes, I remember the day I made the decision. He was sitting at home watching TV. And it was a movie, a TV movie about fascism and Nazis, but then the news broke in. And here he was in the 60s on his couch, comfortable in the suburbs of New Jersey, and he sees on the news, breaking news about what's happening in Alabama. And it was a picture of all these marchers who started in Selma and were trying to get to Montgomery. And they got stopped on a bridge. And there he said he watched as these people tried to pray. You all know what it says in the Bible. If my people who are called by their name, by my name, will humble themselves, pray, and seek my face. And so here they were, staring down Alabama state troopers. And they knelt down to pray, but at that moment the state troopers came in, and he said he watched that TV and was so horrified to see what happened to these faithful people, to these folks of prayer. Saw them getting beaten over the head, and at that point he got up off of that couch and decided that he had to do something. Think about the power that is. A faithful community standing up in righteous indignation, standing up against violence with peaceful hearts and loving actions. Their energy sprang and jumped 1,000 miles and changed the heart of someone in New Jersey, who would then go on and change the destiny of people unborn. And so I want to tell you all today that this is a moral moment in our country. That this is a time that faith leaders need to be more faithful. I got to tell you right now, we all know that faith without works is dead. We all know what James Baldwin says, I can't hear what you say because I see what you do. We live in a nation right now where you can't preach on Sunday and then allow the country to go to pot on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I want to talk about some faith. When my pastor, I got elected, he talked to me about 1 Corinthians 4th chapter, 2nd verse. He said, it is now required that those who have been given a trust must act faithfully. And so this is my heavy heart today. We live in a nation where we are still fighting to try to make this nation live up to its promise. We have a civic gospel where we say the words. We pledge an oath to the ideals of liberty and justice for all, but we still face entrenched injustices within our own community. Let me tell you what we don't talk about enough in this country. With all the issues going on, the biggest cancer on the soul of this country is a criminal justice system that has gone so far awry that in just the last year since 1980, our federal prison population has exploded 800%. That now we are doing what no civilization has done in human history by imprisoning so many of our own people. 1 out of every 4 incarcerated people on the planet Earth are here in America. 1 out of every 3 women on the planet Earth incarcerated are here in the United States of America. And remember that we have a system, as Brian Stevenson says, that treats you better if you are rich and guilty than poor and innocent. We have a system, a drug war that's been going on that is not a war on drugs, but a war on people. Because the folks that are being ground into this criminal justice system are the disadvantaged, or the low income, or the mentally ill, or the drug addicted, and overwhelmingly people of color. Come to my community. I'm the only United States senator that lives in an inner city community, in a majority black city. I'm the only United States senator that lives in a community like that that is also low income. The median income where I live is $14,000 per household. And you can see the difference from the community I grew up in to the community I've served in 20 years. There are 2 different justice systems. I hear all these people want to talk about legalizing marijuana. Well, marijuana has been legal for the privileged in this country for a long time. Because they don't get arrested. They don't get stopped. There's nobody stopping and frisking on college campuses. Stanford and Princeton and Harvard, there's a lot of drugs there. But there's no FBI sting operation. They're coming into our communities. They're coming into neighborhoods like mine. And we now know there's no difference between blacks and whites for using drugs or dealing drugs, but if you're black in this country, you're almost 4 times more likely to be arrested for it. And then you all know this. Vanderbilt University says that if we had incarceration rates the same as our industrial peers, we'd have 20% less poverty in America. Why? Because when you get a conviction for nonviolent drug crime, when you get convicted for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing, and you know we don't have trials anymore in America. About 95% of our criminal convictions are done by plea bargain. And it is not a bargain. You take a 17-year-old kid and tell him, I'll try you as an adult, stack mandatory minimums, you'll be facing 15 years, or plead guilty to this, and you can get out today. But that boy does not understand that they have a felony conviction now, which is a lifetime sentence. Because you can't get business licenses when you got a felony conviction. You can't get jobs when you have a felony conviction. You can't get Pell Grants when you have a felony conviction. The shame of it all is that most Americans don't know what goes on in our prisons. Women who are incarcerated. Listen to formerly incarcerated women. 86% of the women we incarcerate are survivors of sexual trauma. We take women who've hurt and been harmed, and we put them in conditions that compound their trauma. We take children and we put them in solitary confinement, what other countries call human rights violations. We shackle pregnant women while they're giving birth. This is going on in the country that professes to love freedom and justice. But it doesn't stop with criminal justice. I hear all these people want to talk about climate change, and I'll join them. I'm concerned about the acidity in our oceans. I'm concerned about the polar ice caps. But why don't people who talk about climate change talk with the same ferocity and the same urgency about environmental injustice in communities like mine? People want to talk about Flint, Michigan as if it's an anomaly. It is not an anomaly. Reuters shows us that there's over 1,000 jurisdictions where children have twice the blood lead levels in Flint, Michigan. In places in my state, from Camden to Newark, they're drinking out of bottled water. We see environmental injustice is now killing communities. I've traveled around our nation. I've seen that these Superfund sites are now more often in the poorest communities, often in communities of color. We know we now have longitudinal data. And we know that children growing up around Superfund sites, there's 2 within miles of Newark, 1 within Newark, have a 20% higher rates of birth defects, 20% higher rates of autism. I've traveled this country now because this is not just an urban pain. This is a common pain from urban to rural areas. It's a common pain, and we should have common purpose. We should know about the folks in Duplin County, North Carolina, who've had these large companies, large hog farms, even a Chinese company, Smithfield, the largest one of all, has these massive concentrated animal feeding operations. Pigs produce 10 times the feces that humans do. And they pour it in these large lagoons, and then they spray it over fields right within poor communities. And those poor communities can't breathe their air, they can't run their air conditioning, they can't put their clothes on the line. Why aren't we speaking about this environmental injustice? I've been through the Black Belt to the mountains of Alabama, in towns like Tallahassee, in towns like Uniontown, the very town in Uniontown where they took people for the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Back then they were injecting poisons into people's bodies, but now they're injecting poisons into their communities. Toxic waste dumps where they've had no say to stop being plopped into their town, driving down their property rates. Why aren't we talking about environmental injustice? When there's places like Cancer Alley along the Mississippi River, where blacks have owned that land since slavery, and they have toxic chemicals, cancer rates that are off the charts. Why aren't we talking about this? And if we're talking about criminal justice, if we're talking about environmental justice, we cannot forget economic injustice. How can we live in a nation where folks who do the same work still can't get the same pay? Why do we live in a nation like community members of mine, people who don't call people in my city lazy? People line up around buildings for jobs, and then they get their jobs, like a friend of mine, Natasha, who works for IHOP. Took her kids to see Black Panther the other day. She works a full-time job. She makes $2.13 an hour. Tries to get tips and has to endure sexual harassment so she can hopefully get her tips. The irony that she works for a restaurant, catching extra shifts where she can, and she still lives at the poverty line. She needs food stamps to feed her family. She works full-time and she needs public housing to live in. And to add insult to injury, when her child has asthma, and you all understand, communities, urban communities, the asthma rates are 2, 3, 4 times higher. So when her son is in the emergency room across the street in University Hospital, she has to make that terrible choice that Americans make all over this country. Do I stay on the job to get this paycheck? Or do I give up today's paycheck, might miss my rent, to go be with my child? Because we are the only industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have paid family leave. Afghanistan and the Congo have paid family leave. But we still have women in this country and men in this country that are forced to make that decision. Now I'm going to tell you right now, I got my BA from Stanford, but I got my PhD on the streets of Newark. And there's a whole lot of folks that taught me some good lessons. There's a woman on the 5th floor of the projects who once told me, Miss Virginia Jones, she said, boy, tell me what you see in this neighborhood. The neighborhood I still live in the back in the 90s, it was off the hook. I said, what do you mean, what do I see? She goes, describe the neighborhood. I mentioned the crack house, I mentioned the projects, I mentioned the graffiti, and the more I talked, the more upset she looked with me. And then I said to her, what's wrong? And she goes, well, you can't help me. And she starts walking away. I was confused, and I ran after her, and I grabbed her from behind, very respectfully. Come on now, respect your elders. And I said, Miss Jones, what are you talking about? And she goes, boy, you need to understand something. The world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. And if you're one of those people who only sees darkness and despair and problems, that's all they're ever going to be. But if you're one of those stubborn people who every time you open your eyes, you see hope, you see opportunity, you see love, you see the face of God, then you can be one of those people that helps you. I want you all to know something. I miss Obama. I miss Obama. And I miss her husband too. I miss her husband. I miss him. But I miss Obama. But I want you all to notice something. I'm just closing up on my remarks, and I haven't mentioned Donald Trump at all. And why do I say that? Because it's not about him. It's about us. And our problems and issues and challenges in this country did not start with Donald Trump. There are reasons to organize and to march and to protest well before this president got elected. I am tired of people allowing someone who preaches hate to turn us into haters. Someone who spews darkness to make us go dark. Someone who's trying to divide to make us attack other people. Let me tell you right now, there's another senator on the Republican side of the aisle. He and I just got together. We passed some legislation, perhaps the greatest economic empowerment legislation we've never heard of. He and I put a bill together to allow people with money. We said we've got to get capital into poor communities. And so we created something called something called Opportunity Zone. So you can roll capital gains into funds in the inner city or in rural areas and make investments. It's going to move billions of dollars of capital off the sidelines into our communities. And I did it with a Republican. He happens to be part of a very narrow caucus in Washington called the Big Bald Black Caucus. Tim Scott and I both have gray haircuts. And I say that to say that I am tired of folks trying to always make the center of our problems about other people. Let me give you a very specific example of this. In 2008, when I went to vote for president, I got to my polling place voting for Barack Obama. There was a line around the polling place. I went up to go vote, and I'm telling you, you all know this. I love people here. I met you from Florida, from North Carolina, these genteel communities. I was the mayor at the time. You probably treat your elected officials with civility and grace. But in Newark, we keep it real. And I walk up to the end of the line, and that woman on the end of the line looks at me and sees me, and she says, "Don't you think you're cutting in this line now? I don't care who you are. You ain't special. You're waiting like the rest of us." And I'm the mayor of the city. I got police officers next to me, and I look at this woman and I say, "Yes, ma'am." I waited for hours. Now, 1 year later, I go to vote in New Jersey's gubernatorial election. We have an incumbent Democrat and a challenging Republican you all never heard of called Chris Christie. Nobody shows up to the polls. Nobody shows up. And the Republican narrowly wins, and then he cuts the earned income tax credit. He pulls us out of greenhouse gas agreements. And everybody wants to wonder, why are the Republicans doing this to us? Why are the Republicans doing this to us? We did it to ourselves. The power of the people is always greater than the people in power. And so, I want you all to know that this is a call of the moment. I'm going to end with this note. We had a person on my block, days after the Parkland shooting, Shahad Smith, murdered with an assault weapon on the top of the block that I live. Gun violence didn't start with a mass shooting. We've been seeing gun violence in our communities every single day. I remember when I was angry and broken because another child in my community died, and I cannot tell you, it was one of those moments where I wasn't keeping an eye on God. I let my heart fill with anger. I felt blackness and meanness of spirit. So so angry, and the next morning I woke up feeling like I was choking. Why is this country we can name people like JonBenet Ramsey, Natalie Holloway, but so many children are dying in my communities, nameless, that don't make the news. It seems like nobody cares. And I remember walking down in the lobby of the building, the projects I live, walking out, and there's Miss Jones in the lobby, in the courtyard. Her son in the 80s was killed in the lobby of the building I live, but she never left those buildings. I see her, and her back is to me, and I stop and just look at her, and she suddenly turns around and sees me and says nothing. She did exactly what I needed. I was brokenhearted, and I'm telling you right now, if America has never broken your heart, then you don't love her enough. She opens her arms just to hug me, and there I was, this big adult man, 6'3", and I ramble across the courtyard like a little boy and go into her arms, and she holds me, and then she rubs my back, and she says 2 words over and over again, and that's what I want to leave you with. She says 2 words that have nothing to do with the pie in the sky when you die. It has everything to do with the call of our country right now. She says 2 words. Over and over, 2 words that I held on to when I was the mayor of Newark, that I held on to as a senator on the days I feel like I'm banging my head against an implacable wall of resistance. The 2 words she says over and over are the ones I want to leave with you. This is what she says. As I'm crying on her shoulder and she's holding me tight. She says, stay faithful. Stay faithful. Stay faithful. We have come this far by faith, and we gotta stay faithful. Faith the size of a mustard seed still can move mountains. We gotta stay faithful. We know that we've come this far by faith. The faith of slaves who believed in freedom. The faith of freedom riders who knew we would find freedom. The faith of workers who in sweatshops dreamed of workers' rights. We gotta stay faithful. The faith of a king who never made it to the promised land, but he saw it from the mountaintop. If we stay faithful, if we work with our faith, if we struggle with our faith, I know one day justice will roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. We